Hey everyone, my name is Renee. Welcome to my channel, Created by Renee. This is a very special video because, well, for several reasons. First, it is the very first official technique demonstration video on Created by Renee. Second, we're going over a drawing technique. Drawing was my very first passion. And last, if you haven't guessed it by the thumbnail, we're going to be drawing something that was an obsession of mine for years, and I spent a lot of time growing up doing trial and error of this subject. There is so much in the realm of drawing to cover that I'd like to keep this first video very simple. For those of you that may already have experience drawing, this may cover some things you already know, but I'm doing this assuming that you know nothing about drawings. I'm open to questions and requests and suggestions for how I might improve my technique. There should be one additional video this week, and that one will probably involve drawing. And next week we'll be branching out into other media like paper mache. I'm gonna have separate playlists so you can explore different materials and topics that you're interested in. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump in. So real quick before we start, I did want to share just one more thing, and that's this book, Drawing the Head and Figure by Jack Ham. This was one of my main and first points of reference when I was trying to learn how to draw. I used it throughout my childhood and into my adult years. I'll link it down below. But there are a lot of great books out there. This is just the one that I always had on hand, and maybe it'll help you. So to get started, we'll obviously need some sort of paper. This is one of my brand new sketchbooks. It barely has anything in it, but we're not going to use that. We're going to kind of keep it simple. So let's grab some scrap paper. So next we'll need something to draw with, and a lot of people will recommend fancy pencils, maybe a couple of smudge sticks for shading and blending, a retractable eraser like this one, and assorted other erasers, but we don't need all that. We're just going to start simple. So to keep things simple, I'm just going to use a selfie that I already had on my tablet, and I just blew it up so I can see all the details in the eye. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start sketching. I'm going to pop it right here on the side here so you can follow along if you want. I start out by sketching the outer eye, and I sketch it lightly so that it's easier to erase parts of it later when I'm trying to get highlights and doing different variations of gray. So just don't push down too hard initially. Okay, as I started drawing this, I realized that my proportions were a little bit off. It's a little bit tricky to sketch something with a camera shoved between your hands and in front of you. So I'm gonna go back in and erase that. It's very important, it's almost more important than actually the physical drawing part of it, to sort of observe your subject first and break down the shapes of things and the size of things before you start trying to copy them. It's more important to see the abstract shapes, to me, before you start drawing, so you can just sort of assemble abstract shapes and sizes. And that's the waterline I'm pointing at to show that my pupil is pretty close to the waterline but not touching it, the lower lid. So I'm trying to get that proportion correct to start out. And just, if you focus on, this is what I learned over time, if you focus on getting the shapes that bring together an image as a whole, get the shapes and sizes right first, and then the image will sort of come together itself. It's just a matter of mimicking shapes that make a whole picture. I don't know if you're familiar with pointillism, but George Seurat was a famous artist who did pointillism, and in his drawings, basically, his paintings were lots and lots of dots that came together to make shapes that finally became large-scale pictures. Anyway, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here, because this is sort of if you think of it as embellishing, lashes are the last priority. They should be something that you do last. Now I'm starting in on the fleshy pink area in the corner of the eye. If you look close, it's got little lines, and I'll shade that in later. I'm adding some shading in under the lid, but I'll do more of that later. Okay, so now I'm working on the pupil of the eye, which is the little dark area in the middle that expands and contracts in different lighting. And speaking of lighting, the white of the eye is actually not stark white if you pay close attention. It can range from very light gray to dark gray, depending on the lighting. So now I'm going to go in and add in an eyelid crease. And I'll get darker on these details. Okay, what's with the lashes? Again with the lashes. Again, it's best to save stuff like lashes for last. I don't know why I keep messing with those, and maybe I'm nervous because this is my first demo. But, and now I'm going to go in and erase just a little piece right there because I just to start trying to get those highlights in. And I'm adding some shading here. But lashes, again, something that can be left for the end because I'm probably going to end up erasing some of that as I do my shading in a few minutes. If you look at the eyeball, I just want to point out, you can see a range, sort of a, the popular term is ombre, but us drawing people call it gradient. You'll see a gradient in the white of the eye that goes from top to bottom, whereas there's shading or shadow underneath the lid. Speaking of underneath, now I'm going to try to mock in these big old bags under my eye. No, they're not bags. Just there's shadow. Even if you have bright, clear eyes and bright under eye area, there's usually going to be some sort of shadow indicating depth because your eye 9 times out of 10 is going to come forward, so there's going to be depth. And you get depth in an image by adding layers of color, like shading different values, dark to light, helps you get that depth and dimension. And now I'm going back in. If you look at my pupil, even though you can't see the little lines, there's not enough light in my pupil to see the lines in it. You do see the shapes where light and shadow play in it. So that's what I'm trying to do here, sort of mimic the shapes that are visible in my pupil. So you might notice that I'm sketching lines in, but in the picture, there's not a line there. It's a shadow. And this is where the stubs or smudge sticks that I mentioned earlier would come in handy. Those, I'll demonstrate. You can use them to soften the lines into shadow, where you don't see a hard line. Like, we're not going for line art here, line art is totally fine, but we're trying to go for a softer, more natural look. So I'll demonstrate in a few minutes how the difference the stub makes, and you can actually use a Q-tip or a piece of paper towel to get the same effect. But to start, like, I'll just sketch in some lines that can be softened later. The same way, like, ladies, when we do our makeup and we start with, you know, you put in the color and then you sort of soften it with your finger or with a brush. This is funny. Does anybody else have the urge to blow the little eraser crumbs off the screen every time I erase something in this video? One thing that improved my drawing, my sketching, over time, I realized that I wasn't putting enough contrast into my sketches. Like, I would sketch something very light and then I'd be sort of scared to mess with it anymore. But it's really important to go back in and darken your lines as you sort of get on the track to where you want the drawing to go. Go back in and reinforce and darken your lines and build your shading up some, so that there's clarity in the picture, there's interest, and there's visual pop. If it's sort of a dull, washed out image, it's the same as if you took a picture, you know, with your phone or something, and you had to go back in with an editing app to add some contrast and sharpen it up because it's just too dull, it's boring, there's nothing to it. Well, that's important in sketching too. You gotta go back in and add some contrast to the sketch. So in real life, once you get the hang of sketching something like this, it goes a lot faster. And I thought about speeding up this video so it would be a shorter, quicker tutorial, but I really wanted you to be able to see some of the details, some of the steps. Okay, so now hopefully you can see where I'm finally getting around to adding more shading under the lid. I will admit I'm taking a little creative license with the shading. I'm making it a little bit more bold than it is in the actual picture, but I just really, that's okay. I just want a little pop, and I want to make it, you know, have more depth to it. So I intentionally left some of the highlights in the eye in my sketch a little bit more loose and open so that I could play around with them. They'd be easier to erase and do details. I'm erasing right here, and now I'm going to go back in and tighten it up around that highlight I just emphasized. And now you get the effect of a glossy, wet surface of the eye. So now I'm bringing in the stub so you can see that it's smudging and making it a lot more smooth and blending. And that's where we're sort of removing the line effect and creating more of a shadow, a soft, more natural shadow. Okay, so now some more shading on the lid. In playback, I can see where I can tighten up the shapes on the eye if I wanted it to look more exactly like my own eye. But just for demo's sake, we're seeing how we can easily create a realistic looking eye, and we'll worry about portraiture later. Keep darkening. Keep adding emphasis. I notice in a lot of the media that I work in, there's a lot of adding and subtracting going on, where I just sort of add in some color or some shading or some shape, and then I go back in and subtract some to get some highlights or to get some definition. That seems to be like a rule that goes across all my disciplines, and I like it. It's very effective for me. Now I'm going back in for a little bit more highlight effect. If you look at the middle of the eyelid, this is actually an effect that I notice we ladies often do with eyeshadows. We'll put a highlight right there, smack in the middle of the eyelid. Well, same holds true for drawing. You can use your eraser to take away some of the shading. If I were doing this hyper realist, I would zoom in there and like see where those little circles of light are on the eyelid. It's a bunch of tiny circles that make up that highlight. It's not just one block of light. So that's just a note. If you were wanting to do a more hyper realistic version, you would want to do the textures in there. Going back in with the stub again. More highlight on the lid. And I want to point out again, for a super realistic effect, you see on my natural lid, there's a bunch of tiny dots of light. It's not just one big blob. Now I'm noticing along the edge of the pupil, there's a little bit of a glare, so I'm going to erase some of that. Now I'm just sort of taking some creative license, playing around, not really going by the picture anymore. I will say my favorite part of this sketch is the corner of the eye where there's a little bit of highlight under the little curl. Now I wanted to share this retractable eraser. It pops out like a ballpoint pen. I shared this in the beginning of the video. This thing, even though I said you don't have to have this to sketch, it's a help, because once you've used it a few times, it sort of, you know, you get a little bit of a sharp point, and it helps with erasing tiny details. So that comes in handy. I will say it's, you know, a worthwhile little tool if you just want to invest in something. This little retractable eraser is pretty good. And notice how, again, like right here, the add and subtract technique that I was talking about earlier. Now that I've done some highlighting, I'm going back in and adding some more shadow, and I can blend that more. And now it's finally safe to do lashes. Notice that I'm just doing soft, light, curved triangles. If you want to do more dramatic, you can. But to get that sort of look of them coming forward and being realistic, soft, light, curved triangles. Now I'm going to go back in and emphasize the pupil a little bit more shadow under the lid. And I think I want to add some little lines in here. I can barely see them in my real picture, but I'm going to add them in there anyway for emphasis. And that, my friends, is the end of our first demo. If you've watched this far, I really appreciate you. I thank you. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you like and subscribe. And I will see you on the next one. Bye.
By creating an imaginary picture. Usually it's something that moves.